Hello, this is Connie Marshall, and welcome to my presentation, Budget Basics, Problems, and Pitfalls. My approach for this presentation is first to review some basics of the budget process, the budget document itself, best practices for creating a budget, then I've provided some case studies to consider, followed by some information on how the budget affects students, how the economy affects not only the budget but perhaps curriculum as well, and then we'll finish up with some points to consider or my final thoughts. The budget process begins with the strategic plans of the college. The strategic plan should be the guideline of what the college believes is important and how the college wants to move toward it. The strategic plan and the budget should include input from all constituents of the college. The budget document should identify the services to be offered with corresponding funding and the rationale for the decisions that are made. An organized budget document lessens redundancy and allows for display of information in a logical sequence without excess details. The Government Finance Officers Association for Community Colleges has provided us with a best practices. They worked with practitioners, researchers, and other education finance experts to identify best practices in community college budgeting. These best practices aim to leverage the budget process to align resources to student outcomes. So we'll start with step one. Step one is preparing and developing inputs to the budget process. The planning and budgeting process begins with the established principles and policies to guide the budget process and gaining a better understanding of the forces that shape the budget. Moving to step two, define the goals and identify the gaps. Well-developed goals are vital to the budget process and should be coupled with gap analysis of current state academic achievement. Moving on to step three, develop strategies to close the gaps. Strategies should be adopted and implemented to achieve goals by closing identified gaps. Moving into step four, prioritize spending to enact strategies and allocate resources. A well-crafted budget document results from prioritization and allocation of expenditures that align with the college's goals or strategic plan. Step 5 is to check your performance. Performance should be regularly checked to see if progress towards those goals, toward your strategic plan, is being made. Step 6 is enhanced budgeting practices. Defining roles, measures of success and allocation methodologies increases transparency and accountability in the budget process. The budget document should include expected expenses such as faculty salary and benefits, and these typically make up about 80% of the expenses. Normal expenses such as facilities, operational costs, and leases. The rising cost of electricity, gas, and rising property tax, those are all part of that. Planned new expenses, which would be like program startup, replacing worn out equipment, those type of things. And innovative ideas or new program ideas and cost. And basically these are funded from what is left after all the other expenses are funded. The budget document should also include unrestricted and restricted funds. Those are what supports the core operations of the college. Expenses, the expected ones, and some reserve for unexpected expenses. Auxiliary enterprises, which may or may not be self-funded, and that would be like the bookstore, sports, those types of things. And then tuition and fee projections, and that's an important and critical role right there. You are projecting what you feel like the enrollment is going to be for the following year. So it's a best guess or a calculated guess or a calculated risk. So that's one that you want to be very careful with. Problems and pitfalls. Each university and community college has their own set of budget challenges. Finding the right plan to make the institutional budget balance in order to fund basics and innovative projects is one major challenge. Working with the funds that are received from tuition, state appropriations, and any other sources of income, such as endowments, the yearly budget must be matched with the strategic plan of the education institution. The current economy has placed higher education in a position where they must make drastic budget cuts and increase tuition just to cover costs. Community colleges must often make tough decisions between funding for staffing or funding for new degree programs. Here's some case studies to consider. What some colleges did and why. And did it work? Was it successful? Was their plan successful? The first one we're going to look at is Cayuga Community College. Cayuga Community College is part of the State University of New York. Their plan to balance their budget was to increase tuition rates. And that doesn't seem very extreme, but for them it was, because that's a measure they had not taken in the prior year. So in 2017, they had had a 0 increase in tuition. So that forced them to have a larger increase this year. The increase was 7.25%, which is a kind of an extreme increase in tuition. It amounted to about $260 per credit hour. In addition to that, Cayuga also asked the Cayuga County for an increase in funding of over 2%. And that's kind of important because they had not received an increase in 2017, although they had requested it. So those two things together, they felt like they would be able to balance their budget. And it worked. Their drastic measures worked. They were able to balance their budget without a reduction in force. So their calculated guesses and best practices that they had gone through to make their budget actually worked. Here's another college, Lansing Community College. Lansing Community College, their plan was a tuition increase and a layoff of 20 employees. The administrators of Lansing Community College found themselves with a $7.4 million budget gap brought on by factors like increasing property taxes and decreased state funding. So their tuition increase for in-state students was relatively moderate. It was a 3.9%. However, their out-of-state students increased by 12.9%, so that was a little bit bigger hit. International students, they saw the worst. They saw a hefty 28% hike in their tuition rates. So did it work? It did. They balanced their budget. However, their international student population will ultimately decrease. With a 28% hike in tuition rates, that's probably an area of, or a group population of students that will decrease. And at times like this, you really don't want to decrease a group of students, but that's probably what's going to happen there. Here's another case study, Frederick Community College. Frederick Community College is in Maryland, and their plan was to budget conservatively to balance their budget. So they had a tuition increase of only 2.9%, which is kind of a relatively small one. It's not large at all. Their conservative budget, however, didn't allow for any growth of any new initiatives. So new programs, no new courses, no new structures, no improvements of anything. They basically had to stay status quo. And in addition to that, they also had to use some of their reserves to fund normal expenses for the year. Well, did it work? Well, their plan worked, as they did have a balanced budget. And why did it work? Why was that 2.9%? Why was that effective? Well, they had a little bit of knowledge of certain things. That's why it worked. The college qualified for a state grant that was specifically for colleges that could keep their tuition increases under 3%. So although their tuition increase was only 2.9%, not going to bring in a whole lot of revenue, but because of that, they got extra state funding. So the knowledge of that helped balance their budget. Ohio Community Colleges in general was the next case study. Ohio Community Colleges, their plan was to balance their budget was a reduction in force and a flat fee increase per student. Now, they had some extreme budget needs that year, and due in part to a state funding decrease of about 15% per college. So that was kind of a harsh thing to deal with to begin with. So their reduction in force and a flat fee, did it work? Well, natural attrition was useful. It was very helpful for them. They did not fill positions where people retired or had moved on to a different college or gone on to a different job area. So that did help. Did it work? Ultimately, the plan did not work. With that huge of a state funding decrease, they were just not able to pull it out with their reduction in force and the flat fee of I think it was $200 per student. So they were not able. It did not work for them, and they ended up having more of a reduction in staff. So in that one, it did not work. How the budget affects students. We all know that it does affect students because the college overall is affected by the budget. But here's a couple of situations. In 2017, Governor Brown was a new governor in California. In an attempt to balance the state budget, he proposed an increase in tuition to community colleges. The amount did not seem large to Governor Brown. It only amounted to about $10 per credit hour, or that came out to be about $300 per year. So although Governor Brown did not feel like that was a large increase, The students did. Community college students, especially $300 per year, that's quite large for them. So the students in California rallied together in an effort to help the governor visualize just what an impact $300 per year cost increase would cause to community college students. The students had their plan for a peaceful demonstration. They gathered the amount of ramen noodles that $300 would buy, which was 28 cases of ramen noodles, and they delivered them to the governor's office as part of their peaceful demonstration. Their idea was to help him visualize just what $300 could buy for those students. Community colleges typically have food insecurities. They also have daycare issues and costs, those types of things, but food insecurity is somewhat of an issue with community college students. So they wanted to make sure that the governor understood while $300 did not mean much to him, or he didn't see that as a big thing, to a community college student, $300 is 28 cases of ramen noodles. So I think they made their point. How does the economy affect curriculum and budgets? Current economic impact may be bigger than just tuition increases and personnel reduction in force. The curriculum may need to change in an effort to balance the budget. Local economy always plays a part in the curriculum of community college. With local economy leading to industry going out of business, which in turn leads to job losses, that may, over time, lead to curriculum switchover to retraining those workers with new skills. More community colleges may have to restructure their curriculum to more technical pathways. Several different ideas there here that you may have to think about, or those colleges, community colleges, may need to think about. Retraining those workers, providing pathways to increase occupational programs, career prep courses, and training for careers that are in demand locally. What does your local area need? What type of workers do they need? And you may have to go for training for those careers just to help the people in your local area be successful. Another example of how the economy affects curriculum and budgets, especially in this area. Tennessee's new governor, Bill Lee, has some strong opinions surrounding high school students' needs and community college offerings. A program known as GIVE, G-I-V-E, or the Governor's Investment in Vocational Education, is ready to help support partnerships between industry and schools. Such initiatives are designed to increase the offerings of technical and vocational from high schools and community colleges. Readily available funding for this type of program and course offerings make it lucrative. High schools and community colleges may desire to add or change curriculum focus in order to gain the competitively awarded community grant funding. Any additional funding for a college can be useful to help balance the budget. So although these grants are specifically for these types of programs, a community college that receives a large grant or a large amount of money that they weren't expecting, even if they're having to change their curriculum or update their curriculum to fit into those areas, that's additional monies for the college that can help offset some other costs. So he's making it worthwhile. He's making it lucrative for you to look at those areas for sure. And I'm going to end with just some important points to consider, or my final thoughts. With a turnover in budget managers, yearly budget training is essential. We haven't talked much about budget training, but that is a large part of what does need to happen within community colleges. Expecting a first-time budget manager to understand not only the budget of an area, but also how the budgeting process works, is setting that person up to be unsuccessful and will affect that area, not only that area, but the college as a whole. The college should place a percent of funds received each year in a reserve. It's more like a savings plan, and that's crucial. That should come off the top. That shouldn't be the last thing that you do. That should probably be the first thing that you do in that budget cycle. Each college must be conservative with their estimate of enrollment for the upcoming year. And my final thought is underestimating enrollment and overestimating expenses is much better than the reverse of that. Thank you and have a great evening.